These imposing mud brick ruins belong to Merv, once a vital, wealthy nexus of the Silk Road and a major commercial engine for the Sasanian Empire. Beneath the diverse, bustling trade of its merchants, absolute political and social power belonged to a strict hierarchy of Zoroastrian elites. This Sasanian rock relief illustrates the exchange of the ring of power. Persian monarchs claimed their right to rule directly from divine Zoroastrian authority, binding state religion and loyalty to the empire into a single, indivisible unit. For Christianity to survive in this environment, it could not rely on grassroots preaching alone. It had to penetrate the heavily guarded upper class. Convincing a Persian noble to defect required that individual to willingly forfeit their family legacy, their inherited wealth, and the state's legal protection. The expansion of Christianity in Merv relied on structural infiltration. It required individuals willing to challenge the Sasanian intellectual order from the inside out. Mar Georgis was born directly into this elite stratum. As the son of a wealthy Persian family in Merv, he carried the highest social expectations of the empire. His father explicitly demanded that Georgis study the Persian doctrine, the formal Zoroastrian teachings required to take his rightful place among the great men of society. Georgis flatly refused. He declared to his father that any doctrine not sanctified by belief in God was an invention of Satan. This rebellion carried a severe economic and social cost. He accepted total disenfranchisement and exile to sever his ties to Sasanian high society. His defection was driven by rigorous study rather than sudden emotional fervor. He had enrolled in the Schools of Life-Giving Doctrine, established earlier by the evangelist Bar Shaba, proving an underground Christian network already existed within the city. Georgis demonstrated that institutional shift begins when the elite class, the very people designed to protect the status quo, voluntarily adopt a competing worldview. The basic theological education available in Merv could only take Georgis so far. To build something self-sustaining, he needed to master the actual mechanics of spiritual discipline. He left the Sasanian sphere entirely, undertaking a long pilgrimage toward the ancient centers of the faith in the West. His travels first brought him to Jerusalem, anchoring his individual quest to the physical, historic geography of early Christianity. But his critical destination was Mount Isla in northern Mesopotamia. This remote peak was the nerve center of East Syrian monastic reform. There, he became the disciple of Mar Abraham, a leader actively restructuring the rules of monastic life. Abraham built his system on two strict pillars. The first was extreme physical deprivation, using strict fasting and poverty to conquer the desires of the flesh. The second mandatory pillar was intense intellectual inquiry. Monks were required to maintain high-level literacy and rigorously copy ancient texts. These two concepts merged to create a new kind of spiritual elite, the scholar monk. On Mount Isla, Georgis realized that spiritual fervor without an intellectual framework is fragile. To change Merv, he had to explore an entire educational system, not just a set of beliefs. Georgis returned to Merv, but he deliberately bypassed the bustling urban center, settling instead on the quiet, remote outskirts of Zarak. He abandoned his inherited wealth entirely to live in a handmade shatter, a solitary fabric tent pitched in the arid desert. Inside this shelter, he applied the brutal discipline he learned at Isla, stripping his daily existence down to absolute necessities. The silence and poverty of his tent stood in sharp contrast to the commerce-driven wealth of his former peers inside the city walls. This created a distinct psychological paradox. By totally isolating himself from society, he generated massive social curiosity. Local residents, intrigued by a nobleman enduring such voluntary hardship, began traveling out to Zarak simply to observe him. Over time, a group of local men converted and stayed. They became known as the Brothers, organically forming a nascent community around his tent. A solitary, radical commitment to asceticism acts as a magnetic force. It naturally draws observers and catalyzes the formation of a collective community. An informal camp of tents is inherently vulnerable to weather and time. To survive across generations, this community required permanent architecture. Georgis dismantled his temporary shelter and oversaw the construction of a formal, permanent monastery complex in the desert. But erecting stone walls was only half the equation. To function properly, the complex needed a specialized intellectual hub. He established a dedicated school deep inside the monastery walls, directly executing the dual-pillar system of Mar Abraham. The curriculum enforced a strict combination of spiritual conditioning and rigorous academic study, shifting the community away from informal observation towards standardized instruction. This standardized curriculum transitioned the community into an academy of trained scholars. By embedding a school directly within a monastic framework, Georgis engineered a permanent engine for intellectual and spiritual production right on the edge of the Sasanian Empire. How did this hybrid institution impact the broader social fabric of Merv? The school's demanding academic standards made it highly attractive, even to non-Christian Persian elites who placed immense cultural value on literacy and philosophy. It created a highly efficient cycle. Sasanian upper class entered the complex, underwent rigorous training, and emerged as Christian intellectuals. These graduates integrated back into Merv, and from there branched out, establishing further educational nodes across Central Asia. This reproductive cycle effectively bypassed state censorship. Rather than relying on public debates, the movement grew through undeniable educational superiority. By prioritizing elite education, the school provided Merv's Christians with the intellectual tools to replicate their culture across the empire's borders. At the end of his life, Mar Georgis was buried within the very church he had built. His tomb provided a focal point, grounding his spiritual legacy in a heavily fortified structure designed to withstand the harsh physical environment. His legacy was a specific institutional blueprint that remained functional long after the individual monks had passed. This precise template, the fusion of monastery and school, became the mechanism that allowed the East Syrian Church to expand deep into Asia over the following centuries. The Merv model proved that an intellectual ecosystem, once rooted in a permanent institution, can persist and expand even within a rival empire's borders. The story of Mar Georgis suggests that the survival of an idea depends entirely on the strength of the institution built to teach it.